This is your girl, Kimberly Harris. Welcome to the Bitter Greens podcast. The idiom good grief has been in my head all week, and we usually use it like good grief, like you're upset or frustrated or surprised about something. How it showed up in my head was more along the lines of good grief. Is there a such thing as good grief? How do you process grief? What does grief look like? And I think this was really prompted by the pastor that funeralized my brother recently, and he basically reminded us at the interment not to judge others about how they grieve. It might look different. People might keep going and they're a little busy. Some people are sad and crying. Some people isolate themselves. Some people want to be out and about. And so how we grieve shows up differently. And there shouldn't be any judgment in that. While we think about grief as it relates to death, we also grieve in other ways for other things. You might grieve the loss of a friendship that you've had that you didn't think would end. We might grieve a relationship that ended. A lot of us are grieving our old lives. Now that we're living differently in this COVID isolation environment, we're not moving or having access to the same things that we usually would. And so there's grief in that. I know certainly for me. And so with that statement, it triggered how I grieve things. Do I allow myself the time to grieve? And I think that with the last couple of deaths that I've experienced, I have not. But what I have noticed is I get very quiet at first. The tears don't come right away. And as I am in my daily life, I go immediately into problem solving. What can I do to help mode is instantly activated. It's almost like the magnitude of the situation hasn't quite settled in. It's in like emergency response mode. Something can be fixed. I can help somebody, and I just keep going. I just keep going until my body tells me not to. This time, a good friend said, "Stop, Kim. Kim, stop. Stop. You're not a robot. You're not a robot. And you should take the advice that you give." And I was like, oh, how dare her? So friend, thank you. Be quiet, okay? But thank you. Like, we do need those reminders that we don't have to keep going. We shouldn't keep going. We do need to sit in our grief sometimes and process and allow us that space. That things will be there. The work will be there. Take the time. In this quiet time, I took a couple of days off and I hadn't planned to do that. I was like, oh, well, make it work and I'll work during the day and all of the things. And it's just busy distractions, right? I'm glad that I did take a couple of days because I was able to sit with my feelings, but also spend time with my family and reflect on those things. And it's interesting in this thought process, I thought back to when I was a child. My bedroom in our home had a direct view of a memorial chapel that was across the street. And luckily for me, this memorial chapel was like the extra or the bonus memorial chapel for this funeral home. So there wasn't a lot of funerals there, but when the light was on, I knew that there was going to be some sort of a service. As soon as I would see that, I had all of these thoughts, right? So I prayed for the person who passed away. I imagined what their life was like. I imagined what they looked like in their casket, right? And it was more so about being at peace versus what do they look like, especially when there was a tragedy. If it were a car accident, I would just pray that their spirit would go where it was supposed to go and they would be at peace. And I know this is a little, it's a little odd, but it's true. And I'm sharing this just to say how we process death and grief does look different. And some of our experiences at a young age kind of shape how we look at things. And I will not make the jokes about who did the body, which we know is a long-standing joke in the Black community. But I did listen out. If I did not know the person and we didn't go to the funeral, I would listen out to adult conversations to hear what they had to say about the person. And if they said that the person looked like themselves, I was at peace. But, just to say again, I do think that how we process death and manage grief can be vastly different. So I am not a grief counselor, but if you're experiencing grief that you can't manage, there is professional help available. You can start with your primary care doctor, your therapist, or a psychiatrist for assistance. They will help you coordinate care so that you can manage grief. According to the American Psychology Association, grief is the anguish experienced after significant loss, usually death of a beloved person. Grief is often distinguished from bereavement and mourning. Not all bereavements result in strong grief response, and not all grief is given public expression. Grief often includes physiological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, excessive dwelling on the past, and apprehension about the future. Intense grief can become life-threatening through disruption of the immune system, self-neglect, and suicidal thoughts. Grief may take some time. Grief may also take the form of regret for something lost, remorse for something done, or sorrow for a mishap to oneself. That is directly read from the American Psychology Association's website. And so in terms of things that we can do to cope with grief, and as I mentioned before, if you're experiencing overwhelming thoughts and you just can't manage the grief on your own, please don't do it alone. And helping with coping with grief, talk about the death of your loved one with others, with your coworkers, with your family members, with your friends. It doesn't have to be they're gone now, and so I don't want to burden anybody with my thoughts. Let me keep it to myself. That also, gives you the opportunity to celebrate their lives with their memories. A lot of people will do different things on the anniversary of the person's death or their birthday, not only to remember and celebrate their lives, but also keep their legacy alive, especially when there's young children that might not have the same experience with that person as you had as an adult. And so there's a couple of people that have passed away, like my great-grandmother and my great-great-aunt, where they left a tremendous impact on me. When I'm talking to my younger cousins or nephews, I'm like, Mom Virgie used to say, and they're like, well, who's Mom Virgie? And I would tell them the story, right? Part of that is also family legacy and keeping that going. The traditions, for example, my grandfather, we always had big barbecues. If you follow me on social media, you know that I eat seafood, probably way too much, but grew up near the water. Great-grandfather always had crabs at our events. And so that is just something that is ingrained in the tradition of our family. But doing those things, continue those traditions, is celebrating the lives of those people in my family that I cherished. And then also sharing those stories about, name a thing, when I was taught how to make a bed properly, which I hated, or a corn pone recipe, which my great-grandmother had, and it was like a secret recipe, and I'm one of the only ones who knows the recipe and can do it, considerably well. And so those are the things that in our pain, there's purpose in the life of the person that we lost, that we can continue in the way of our teaching and conversation. Also, accept your feelings. Feel all the feels. You're going to feel sadness. You might feel anger. You might feel exhaustion. There's a ton of books that talk about death and dying and grief that I would recommend that you find one that works for you in terms of understanding what the process is. There might be denial. There might be anger, generally speaking, anger with God. There's some resources there, but definitely allow yourself to feel all the things. And then if it does feel overwhelming, again, that's when the recommendation of seeking professional help comes about. Sometimes you do need help navigating through, and you can't get that through a friend. And we all know folks show up, and this is not a slight to those folks. People do show up. You get all the food, you get all the messages. The funeral happens, and then weeks later it gets quiet. In those quiet moments, that's when the death of the person really settles in, and the feelings do too. Make sure that you're reaching out to others. And also, one of the other points, and this is information from a variety of sources, and I'll put this in the show notes in terms of where to get this information for yourself, but reaching out to others that are also dealing with the loss will help you as well. So you're going through it together. You've experienced the loss together. You're able to talk about that loss, and you can even bond and get closer in terms of your relationships, when you are navigating your grief together. So those are just a few things that can help you cope with grief. And just as a recap, talking about your loved one, accepting your feelings, reaching out to others who are also dealing with the loss, and celebrating the life of the loved one. And then the other piece of this, expect the grief to come and go and be prepared for it. You'll know what your triggers are. You'll know when it's coming about. And so just expect that you'll probably not even be prepared some of the time. I remember being fine and out of nowhere, I just started crying. I don't even remember what triggered it. And like I said, I'm not a big crier about things for myself, but I had a memory or something of my dad, and just out of nowhere, like I'm eating, watching Netflix, and then I started crying. It's like, where did this come from? And I let the tears come, and then I let them go. And so I welcome the thoughts in, and then I usher them out when it's time. I think the other important thing that I recommend before we get to place of loss, whether it's in death or a relationship that we no longer have, we've decided to walk away from it, is to assess your meaningful relationships. Do you have bitter greens that should be resolved? Is there something that has been stewing that is worth exploring and resolving so that the relationship is better? And sometimes that doesn't mean, some relationships are meant to be put to rest, right? I can no longer have you in my life, and I know that it's healthier for me to be separated from you. But have you resolved all the things that would make you feel at peace with that separation? Is there someone that you've been meaning to call? Is there something that you've been meaning to say to someone, an apology that is undelivered? Is there a relationship that you want to revive that you haven't, just based on ego or time? And so I think, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we don't want to get to a place of grief or loss before we're exploring the shoulda, coulda, wouldas in that relationship. The question that I want to leave you with is, if someone that you care about isn't here tomorrow, have you done all you can do today? Thank you guys for joining me this week. If you like the podcast, please follow me on Spotify. You can also subscribe on iTunes. I am also on Instagram at bittergreens1. So if you like quotes and want to drop comments about the episodes, you can meet me there. I look forward to talking with you guys next week. Now go win the day. Don't let the day win you.